today we are going to be discussing witchcraft authors. We're going to be discussing some of the biggest names and most popular writers in the entire history of sort of the modern revival of witchcraft. We might get into some historical occult authors too. At least I have some on my list. But we've got one more episode for this season. We'll talk a little bit about that later and what it's going to look like and some of our plans for the future. But I think before we start, we're going to pull a card, right?
Sure.
So today's deck is not a tarot deck. I'm on a thing.
Self-help.
Yeah. It's an oracle deck called the Sacred Symbols Oracle Deck. It's very beautiful. It's very archetypal, very Jungian. And I'm just going to let Brian cut it. I'm going to pull one card. Ooh, this is interesting. The Shadow. So it's very interesting image. We talked about shadow work actually on the last episode, but the shadow, right? The darker side of the self.
I think we made fun of shadow work.
We did. But it's a very interesting deck. The symbols, I'm going to show a few of them. They're very simple. Like this is the symbol for good fortune. This is the symbol for the divine masculine. They're very, very archetypal. And I actually think that if you're looking for a deck to meditate with, tarot might, and you have no experience with divination, a little bit of witchcraft advice, tarot sometimes a bit too much. So oracle decks, god and goddess decks, things that give you a stark image that you can focus on, highly recommend if you're just starting out before you move on to something a little bit more complicated. But on to today's topic. So Brian, do you want to say something a little bit about what we're going to do?
Yes, so for today's show, we decided to focus on witchcraft authors, and I didn't get to head Levi off the pass, but I needed to inform him that Pythagoras doesn't count.
See, hateful.
I want to really explore what seekers and what new people would be looking at when they're studying witchcraft.
Yep.
So we're not going to, however, just focus on the books. We're going to actually focus on the authors, what we know about them, and then talk about their work, their credentials, maybe personal anecdotes, experience, some dead, some living. We probably forgot some. There's only so much we can do. So by all means, feel free to ask us questions about books we don't bring up. Give us some time to go over some.
Yeah.
And you can also ask any questions about witchcraft or Alexandrian craft or comments that we make as we proceed. If you'd like to call in, the number is 504-321-3472. You can call in for questions for both me and Levi. We welcome you to do so. I also want to point out that, I think it's really important to note, I was watching a YouTube video of Thorne Mooney's just like yesterday. Like this show was already happening, but she just did a new video that, and me and Levi have watched her videos for years. She did a new video on, and I don't want to talk too much about her in case she comes up in another thing, but she did a new video and it was on not putting authors on the pedestals. In a sense, that's kind of why I wanted to do this video, is because I think that people who go into the world of witchcraft often don't know who anyone is. Mm-hmm. Another thing she's brought up, which I think we're going to fall a little guilty of in this episode, is that, a lot of times we're recommending books that have been around for a really long time, partially because some of those books stand the tests of time, partially because a lot of initiates prefer books written by initiates. And we are going to speak about credentials and what matters and what doesn't. For instance, I want to point out that something that's often brought up by people is that their credentials is how long they've practiced their self-style witchcraft.
Yeah.
I've been practicing witchcraft for 30 years. If it's your own thing that you've developed, I'm not saying there's no value in that. I'm not saying that people can't benefit from your experiences, but it's really not what I consider a credential, because it's based on just you doing you, which there's nothing wrong with that. Every witch has that sort of their own personal practices, and it's great to share that with each other, and sometimes we really inspire each other. But we're talking about credentials, people who've been trained or have associations. Yep. Because those are the checks and balances that we as human beings can go by. It's kind of like spiritual experiences. If I have Shiva appear before me and give me this divine proclamation, the only one who can really verify that experience is me. It has no value for other human beings. However, if a group of people have that experience, then they can share that together, so on and so forth. As a global population, sometimes we have these sort of humanity experiences or things that we can all relate to, that we can share. But, that's kind of what I'm saying. Your personal experience isn't really a credential to anyone but you. Your time, something that's been said, which is really, really true. For some reason, the favorite thing to say is, I've been practicing for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
I've heard that by several people, and I may have said it myself at one point in time, because I have. More so. I'm not going to date myself. More so now.
Date ourselves here.
But it's that in itself, it means something. It means you've been dedicated to a magical path. It means you've been around for a while. You're not new to this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have credentials. It'd be kind of like saying, I've been healing people for 22 years, but I never actually trained in any kind of healing art. No difference, really. And
yes.
maybe you have been benefiting people. I'm not saying you haven't. There are healers out there like that.
And before we start with the actual authors, two of the things I wanted to say about this conversation is we're kind of in a unique position because much less so me. This is very much so, Brian and also Christian and other initiates we work with. We know a lot of these authors. We meet them. So that changes things.
And we know the inside stories sometimes.
No judgment. But sometimes that does change
sometimes
things.
There's judgment.
But it does change things because sometimes somebody will be talking
when
about an author.
I spied you on Grindr and you've already got people in your life, we're judging you.
Tisk, tisk, tisk.
Sorry.
But it does. That's one of the things that we're dealing with, is that we know some of these people. And the other is that we
Not me. I've never been on Grindr.
I have never in my life and never would. We have intimate sort of relationships with authors. Christian is an author. He wrote, the Witch's Book of the Dead. We have other authors or people who've written our coven. Brian has written a book, Initiation into Witchcraft. So we also have that relationship with people who are writing in the witchcraft community too. They're very close to us. So that kind of makes it interesting because you see how the sausage is made, basically.
And, owning stores we sell a lot of books. Mm-hmm. So, we support a lot of authors. And we try very hard to support authors we feel good about. Sometimes that, it's not possible because sometimes you sell books for years and then find something out or, they misconduct themselves in some way. And so we're pretty good on not putting people up on pedestals who shouldn't be. But sometimes we fall short of that because you can't really monitor everything and everybody.
Yeah, and things change.
We really try to support the art of writing books and witchcraft because they're not the same thing. And we have festivals where people teach, and a lot of times that's authors. Neither Christian, myself, or Levi make our living writing books. Just because we do it or we're going to do it doesn't mean that's not our actual career.
And most authors don't make their money.
No, but for some of them, it is their full-time career, writing, and so they really rely on these festivals and things like that to support their business. So I'm glad to be able to participate in that. But yes, we have a front row seat, and we're certainly not here to abuse that front row seat. But you know me, I tell the truth. So,
but that's been an interesting perspective too.
Yes.
Has been meeting a lot of witchcraft authors or meeting a lot of people in the community.
So why don't you start with the first book, Levi? We'll just take it back and forth.
Well, there's somebody who's asking about
not
one.
them yet.
Not them yet?
No, because let's start with us.
Okay, the first person on my list, because I thought it'd be interesting to start with, was Alex, in terms of the Alexander's lectures. And then...
It's just good to say he never really wrote a book.
I know, but the Alexander's lectures and the early material from our craft.
I'll let you go first on the Alexander lectures. I don't want to talk about the books he didn't write because they might be authors. Then
because there's other authors he wrote about.
The only thing he wrote, and I know the whole backstory to it, but you go first.
Yeah, my only reaction to them is I think they're a fascinating glimpse into the way sort of witchcraft legend was talked about in the early days of craft. And I think I actually recommend that people read it because the Alexander's lectures, they're hard to find sometimes. But I found an old print, I think on Etsy, actually. But the reason I wanted to start there is because there's such a difference in how witchcraft is written about later, like when we get to the authors that I know we're going to get to, that came through Llewellyn and major publishers, versus those early sort of bits and pieces collected from lectures, sort of, were they being honest? There's a mysticism and a sort of interesting power behind those early writings. You even get this a little bit in Doreen Valiente's poetry and Gerald Gardner's books or whatever that you don't get in later witchcraft. And I think I wanted to start here because I thought we could start with some of I know we're going to get to, the Farrars and stuff like that. But the earliest sort of craft writers, it's so different than what came later that's why I think I wanted to start there.
So interestingly enough, the Alexander lectures were not something Alex published. He did write them. So I didn't know about this backstory for many years. If you'll notice, they're published by it's no longer available. It's called Magic Child Publishing. And I certainly don't want to bash on someone that some people I know care about, but the story goes like this. So they are called the Alexander Lectures because he wrote them as lectures, and they were actually an online mailing course. So you paid very little money for them, and he would mail you these courses to go through and to learn about witchcraft.
Used to be very popular.
A man named Herman Slater purchased the course and then published it as the book. And Alex never saw a red cent for it because it was in another country and because it wasn't trademarked. Herman was able to get away with it. Maxine loathes him to this day because she says that the money from those lectures were literally like their children's milk money. And as soon as Herman had published them, the milk money stopped coming in. So it's kind of a tainted book. The truth of the matter is Alex Sanders was never an author, and he never published anything on his own to make money. So, surprising fact. But Levi's right. Regardless of how it came into being, those writings are a nice, unique glimpse at his teaching, thoughts. Obviously, it was different. Meant for public consumption, and he's really like no nonsense in the writings. Some of the things he says are a little shocking.
Yeah, they're very direct.
All right, my turn. Who am I going to go with?
Who are you going to go with?
Pick the first one on my list. Raymond Buckland.
Raymond Buckland. So the Big Blue Book is a blessed be to people who are, Kevin, Katina. So glad to see everyone. Thank you for all the hellos and the greetings and whatnot, the hellos and stuff.
Blessed be to all the initiates.
Yes. So you asked me about Buckland. Raymond Buckland is a fascinating character because Raymond Buckland? Because Raymond Buckland sort of went through a lot of images as an author. So you have him as Raymond Buckland the Initiate, who's sort of speaking from the place of being one of the, the fathers of British traditional witchcraft, the father of British traditional witchcraft in America. And you also have Raymond Buckland the Spiritualist. He was deep into the spiritualist movement. His whole family was before he became a witchcraft initiate. You've also got Raymond Buckland, the independent witch, with his book Sayax Wicca, or back then it was called The Tree, I think. Or I don't know which came first, Anglo-Saxon.
Don't really know which came first, Sayax Wicca or
Sayax Wicca or The Tree.
The both. I
they're
think
the
later
same thing.
Both. I think later.
Well, they're the same thing, but I don't remember who republished it.
Yeah.
But so Buckland's an interesting character. I have an immense love for the Big Blue Book, for Raymond's Complete Book of Witchcraft, because I think it was a massively influential book on a lot of people in America, on their perceptions about witchcraft. It kept things in it, such as binding and sort of the binding with cords and things from traditional witchcraft that I think a lot of other authors shied away from and tried to change the image of witchcraft in a very intense way. So I appreciate that. So I love Buckland for that. I'm not a huge fan, if we're going to be, because we're supposed to be honest during this, right? I do not like almost any other book he ever wrote. And I hate saying that about Uncle Bucky because I love him as a figure in our movement, but I can't stand Sayax Wicca. It's full of misinformation and just made up things about Anglo-Saxon culture that aren't true. And his book on spirit communication, I honestly don't know what happened. It portrays spirit photographs that have been proven to be hoaxes. By people who were confessed charlatans. It's just, he's a product of that Lilydale world. And so love the Big Blue Book. I have mixed feelings about everything else.
Well, one of the things that we could talk about with Raymond Buckland is, once again, we go into credentials. He was actually an initiate of Gardnerian witchcraft and had a correspondence with Gerald Gardner himself, who helped facilitate his initiation and training into Gardnerian witchcraft in the 70s. And Raymond Buckland and his wife Rosemary Buckland seeded the first initiatory coven in the United States. And from that, a lot of other Gardnerian covens have evolved, and we call that the Olwen lines, which consist of Long Island, Kentucky, and the California lines of Gardnerian witchcraft. Those are all American lines. I actually think it's fairly safe to say there are a couple of Alexandrian American lines, for sure, but really the Olwen lines are the real BTW American lines.
Dominant, yeah.
Because Alexandrian craft came later, and there's the Jim Baker line. I always get confused with what his line is called. That's a very American line. The Connecticut line's very American. I suppose the Kentish line is American too, because they all seeded the same way Buckland's did, but they came later.
Yeah.
So in a sense, there's three Gardnerian and three. The Kentish line was also, the problem with the Kentish line is it was also in Britain. So whereas the Owen lines really didn't exist in Britain, like she didn't really have a downline. There's like weird rumors that she's got like a downline in Germany, but honestly, I've never seen it manifest ever outside of lying. So
outside of lying,
you know, her lines really exist in America, where the Kentish line did exist in Britain as well. I don't know if it does now. I know a few Kentish witches, but I don't know that they're practicing in Britain. But the other lines are definitely American, but those 6 lines are really American. But the point is his credentials, I went off track with that, are real.
Bringing it back.
So it's interesting to note that the one thing that he did was publishing Raymond Buckland's complete Book of Witchcraft is the most important thing he did and the most long-standing point of his work, whether he liked that or not. It is still one of the best-selling books on witchcraft. I think, you know, whether people like it or not, it has a great mixture of selling the spirit of witchcraft, giving people witchcraft and the religion of witchcraft without breaking oaths, and it leaves the door cracked open for non-initiates. But it, you know, my only criticism of that work is that most of the rituals are horrible.
They are oddly written.
He wasn't a very good ritual writer, obviously. And the rituals that he does have in there that are any good, I don't think he wrote. So I hated the rituals in it, and I never used them. There's a couple poems in there I liked, that was it. But outside of that, it was a very influential book and definitely influenced me. I've never read his spiritualist books. I did read this horrible book called Chantomatics.
He was not gifted beyond.
I did read the CX book and didn't like that one. There was a Scottish witchcraft book that wasn't too bad.
And he's got one on gypsy magic too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's got lots of books, and he wrote a lot of fiction books as well. So he wrote a lot of books, and I have not read them all. I think he was a good writer. I just don't think he was a good ritual writer, which there is a difference. You have to have a bit of a poetic flair, I think, to write ritual.
Agreed.
Good or bad, it has to be there. So moving on from him, I think it's your turn.
It is my turn. So
I'll do one for me, and then we'll see if they have any.
Yes. So so Christy's mentioning the rituals are very dry. That's exactly how I would describe them, Christy.
And bad.
Yeah, they're dry ritual. It's not my favorite.
Sabbath.
I know, right? It's just not
corny.
my favorite. I love him as a figure in our sort of tradition, but
I think it was called Scottish Witchcraft Picta Wicca or something like that. It's, you know, it's just sort of, it's kind of like Raymond Buckland's complete Book of Witchcraft, but it's got a Scottish flair to it. It really, like, it doesn't have anything about casting circles or anything like that. He claims he met a man who practiced some sort of folk magic in Scotland, and it does have some interesting stuff in there, but it's not like, I suppose because I'm partially Scottish, I was interested in it at the time. It goes along with those Llewellyn waves of like what culture of witchcraft, and I don't really nowadays I don't really like that because I see it for what it is. But
it was a big deal for a while though.
And the funny thing is that he actually was trained by Lady Olwen, who was the high priestess in Perth, Scotland. So really, his real Scottish witchcraft training was from Gardnerian witch.
Yeah.
So this man who probably just practiced folk magic and may have made it all up is who inspired the other book.
Okay. So I'm trying to stay in order a little, not order, but necessarily, but in groups. You know what I mean? So that we're not just bouncing all over the place. So I was going to give, the next one I was going to talk about is the Farrars.
The Farrars. I don't know if that's an order. There's a lot of people in between.
I know, but I'm doing initiates right now.
A lot of people in between. We haven't even talked about
thoughts.
We did Alex, but if you're sticking with Alexandrian initiates, they certainly make some sense. The Farrars are very complicated because the first book that was written was by Stuart, and it was called What Witches Do, and it was a collaborative work with Alex Sanders. And when they began writing that, Stuart was not an initiate. I'm not sure if it happened in the course. Well, maybe he was an initiate right beforehand. I don't know. But he was the first degree. And it was the course of writing that book that brought them in relations with each other. And Maxine and Alex were running the London Coven at the time. Janet was in the Coven, but she had nothing to do with that first book, nor was she partnered with him yet. So they went on to write other books after that book. Now, I think What Witches Do is a really groundbreaking work. It was published by Stuart. Alex never saw a red cent from it, from what I've been told. And his name didn't really go on it. So once again, it wasn't a book that Alex wrote, but he certainly did contribute to it. It's really about Maxine and Alex and the London Coven's workings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's little snippets of things in there, but it's really not on the grounds of like any major oath breaking by any means. There's like very small pieces of poetry in there, but not complete things really too much. And that happened obviously. But the Ferrars went on, I think their big groundbreaking book is one that I have a real love-hate relationship with, and it's called The Witch's Way. And then later on, 8 Sabbaths for Witches, which then they published a third time together as the Witch's Bible. My issue with this book is that a large chunk of it isn't really their work. And it's kind of a difficult subject to talk about because as initiates, we don't like to verify what's authentic and what's not. But there certainly is a lot of initiatory material in there. Not the whole thing, not the whole Book of Shadows, not the whole kit and caboodle. Obviously, they felt okay about what they were doing, and Doreen Valiente felt okay about helping them. However, in my mind, it remains oath-breaking nonetheless, because what I believe is that when you enter into a secret society or the craft, you have to realize that everything you're taught within it doesn't belong to any person. It belongs to the entire community. So if you choose to give something of that community to the general public because you feel like you have the right to do so, I really feel like it's stealing, and I feel like it's disrespectful. And, in the end, am I judging everyone right and left? No, I think that will be between them and their gods. They chose to take those oaths. They know the words to those oaths. They either think there is power in them or there isn't. And there is either power in them or there isn't. I think that how things end are how things end, and everything works out. Now, the love part for me is that it was positive and helpful for me. Mm-hmm. And I think it was positive and helpful for a lot of people. And some might say the ends justify the means, but I will go along with something Maxine says better. The craft will use anyone to survive. So just because something good came out of something evil doesn't make it justifiable. It just means magic finds a way. Yeah. And, I think that just happens. So I really don't know how I feel about the book. I mean, all I can say is that most of it isn't their work. And in most fields, if you are, and there are a lot of authors who've done this, in most fields, if you are publishing things you didn't write, well, there's a lot people would have to say about that.
Yes.
I think that Stewart was a decent writer, but as you find with their other books that they wrote, outside of those 3, they're really kind of not very good. Now, the ones that I did like are The God of the Witches and The Witch's Goddess. I thought they did a really good job with those books. I'm not really a big fan of their other books, and the books that were written later, I've read them all, but I really wasn't a big fan. So I think that those 2 books I really recommend, and they were solid, and they were their own work. I think that, as a priest and a priestess, they have served the craft, and I think they've done more good than harm. But yes, I also think that they have the blood stain of the Oathbreaker upon them. I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to follow their suit either, nor do I think that somebody breaking an oath gives you the right to do so. I think some people have the attitude out there now, it's already been done. Not by you.
Exactly. 2 wrongs don't make a right.
You don't have to do it. You said your oath is between you and the gods. It's not between
2 wrongs
you and
don't
a
make
person. I'm not about that. And I've now written an entire pretty large volume book on witchcraft, and I didn't have to break any oaths to do it. I did have a small little snippet of like the Charge of the Goddess that's been published a million times, so I suppose I could call myself on there, but it's literally like 6 lines at the beginning. I didn't even publish the whole thing. There are some gray areas, and you've got to navigate that for yourself. And as we say in Alexandrian craft, there are no secrets, there are only mysteries. So I think you can talk about a great many things, but publishing the Book of Shadows might be a line, or publishing like actual rituals we do might be a line that shouldn't be crossed. Now, I do agree you can have the entire Book of Shadows and you still wouldn't actually be able to function in our religion, because without the training and lore, it doesn't happen. So I've got a real mixed feeling about those works, but, it's done now.
Yeah.
Long-winded. Let's take some of theirs, shall we?
No,
Did you get a chance to talk about it? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, I honestly would agree with most of what you said. I have very mixed feelings about it too, because it was one of the first witchcraft books I ever read was The Witch's Bible. So
that doesn't mean I don't like Stuart Fry.
Yeah,
doesn't
no
mean
judgment.
I don't like Janet.
But I
never
agree
met
with Brian.
either one of them.
There are issues.
I never met in either one of them, and I never met Doreen Valiente. I'm a huge fan of her poetry, however.
Yeah. But so I'm going to go back a little bit. Do you want to take some of the, because some of those are
Do you want to say
way more
anything,
longer.
or did I just go on so long?
I let it happen. I was just sitting here like, it's okay.
Well, because it's one I can't really not.
I know. I knew it would happen. I knew that's why I brought him up early so we could get it out of the way. So do you want to take theirs because they're out?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what I think so too. So Scott Cunningham obviously was going to come up, and he's mentioned here.
First.
So I don't like Scott Cunningham's books. This is no judgment, and I'm not here for this debate. You know, I know there are serious initiates who do like him. Thorne Mooney loves him. Not loves, but she has good things to say about him. I don't like it. I think that it's stolen material. It's rehashed material. If he had come out honestly, and I'll say this, there are people who have come out and claimed some sort of witchcraft tradition that Brian and I don't believe in, but that I can still give credit to for being aesthetically beautiful or well done. And I'm going to save who I'm talking about for later because they might come up. There are a couple people who have come out and invented something or kind of stolen something from BTW and made something kind of cool or beautiful. He didn't do that. It's the most sort of base form of it. And also, you know, we don't have to go down the whole story because Brian's mentioned it here before, but the whole Llewellyn publishing crowd, there is sour grapes within that community about initiation in general. So I think that comes through too. And I don't understand the point of it. And everybody's like, well, it's a great introduction book. I don't know anyone whose actual serious witchcraft practice resembles what is taught in a lot of these basic books. So I don't understand what the impact was. Like, it got you into the door? Okay. Like, so you could say that same thing about Charmed, like, or a TV show or something. You know, it's like, I just don't see the meat of it at all. And I think part of the problem is I missed this generation. I'm 32. And so when I was younger, Scott Cunningham and Silver Ravenwolf and other major authors had already kind of peaked a little bit. And so it wasn't cool anymore when I was at that teenage age to be into those people. So maybe I just missed it. Maybe I missed my jump for that Llewellyn crowd. That became
I was there
huge.
Before, during, and after.
See, I didn't. I came after, so maybe I just missed it.
I remember when Scott Cunningham's book was first published, and I was in the Open Door bookstore, and one of my first witchcraft mentors was working there, and I at that point in time was already on the path of initiation and identifying as a witch, but there had been a lot I hadn't learned. I was still a baby witch. I know. We're making fun of that, by the way. Yeah. In any case, I remember seeing that, and I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what the word Wicca was. And I said, what is this Wicca? And she said, the beginning of the end. The beginning. I did get the book, and I did read it, and I hated it right off the bat because I'd already been educated well enough to realize a lot of the things he was saying wasn't true. I'd already that was some like regression going on there. I'd already read a lot of the elders' material, so I was aware of what witchcraft was. I just wasn't really overly familiar with the word Wicca because it really wasn't coming up a lot at that point in time. He was really the first. It had come up, but he was the first person to really bring it forward in America. And it wasn't until years later that like I liked his herbal books and stuff like that, maybe if he stayed in his own lane. But that book really wasn't something that he knew much about. As far as I know, his credentials early on were that he was into Hawaiian shamanism. And apparently there was like this huge documentary about him doing all this Hawaiian shamanism stuff with his red beard, and, so he was like, I saw it once.
You could be a ginger shaman.
Clearing a house with some kind of weird plant, and he was being a Hawaiian shaman. Later on, it's my understanding that he was initiated by someone connected to Llewellyn's initiatory line, and Llewellyn was initiated by Lady Sheba. Mm-hmm. And she may come up too, but that's the line in which he was initiated. And so there was something that came up later, but obviously what he published in that book really had no connection to that either. So yeah, I just think it was, I think that book represents a form of cultural appropriation nobody wants to talk about. Here you've got a religion and a living culture that had been going on at that point in time for generations, mm-hmm. and somebody just came along ripped off bits and pieces and then told everyone, you don't need the real deal, you can do it on your own. And what I'm telling you here is perfectly valid. And it began a trend that we started to see more and more that continues to this day. If you were to do that with other cultures or other religious systems nowadays, people would like eat you alive. You'd be tarred and feathered. But I think when it happened, cultural appropriation wasn't really a discussion point, and I think it's really difficult to navigate culturally appropriating what would be considered a modern European mystery tradition by some people. And, you know, as I said, I don't consider witchcraft an ethnic faith, but it's literally no different than if I were to go out right now and just like take all these bits of Catholicism, write a book about Catholicism, and tell you you don't need a pope, you don't need priests.
We have a word for that. It's called Protestantism.
You know, yes.
Like, that's the thing. Just call it something else.
And
like,
I suppose it did evolve that way in a sense because I think he's really responsible for what we would call modern paganism in a lot of ways, but he really had no contribution to witchcraft. And no, I hate the book. I don't think it's witchcraft. I know it did get some people through the door. And interestingly enough, Thorne Mooney said it's a book we shouldn't be recommending anymore.
She did say that.
Because it's
we
just
moved past it.
So outdated in its language.
It's the same way with... I'm going to go ahead.
I've always hated it.
Somebody else brought up Ravenwolf, so let's go ahead and tackle her because it's the same sort of vein. And what I'll say about this is Brian and I are just not the same thing. And this is one of the things that I think we run into.
Much closer to her.
We are, but I think what happens sometimes in these communications is there is just a massive disconnect between people who think their witchcraft is a religious practice, between people who think of it as a spiritual hobby. So if you're really, I'm not saying she does this necessarily, but a lot of authors that might come up in this discussion, if they're approaching witchcraft as just simply praxis, like if you burn something, say something that makes you a witch, and Brian and I view it much more as a pact or an initiatory process with the divine, or the infernal, take your pick. That's going to be a different sort of conversation entirely, and it's going to come off no matter, Brian and I don't play nice anymore because there's no point, because no matter what I say.
I used to play nice.
He never did. I did. I used to try to play nice all the time.
Christine says you've gotten worse than me.
I have, and it's because I used to play nice. I used to try to include everyone and say, oh, I know Scott Cunningham.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it because no matter what I say, people get angry. And so I'm just going to live my truth and say, no, I don't think that's witchcraft. I'm so sorry. I think that's something else. It's just magic, and that's fine too. But because I give up, because no matter what I said, I just got yelled at by people who are desperate for validation. And I think a lot of these books are for that crowd. And so there's just a crowd I don't talk to, like
Scott Cunningham was absolutely making his money off of that. That was his career. Now, Ravenwolf's a little bit interesting because I don't really, according to her first book, I'll tell you, I read that book and I almost think it was like the tail end for a while of books written about witchcraft that were actually about witchcraft. So I'll give her credit for that. I'm not saying it was the only one, but in a sense it represented like this tail end of anything being published that was resembling the witchcraft that I was introduced to. She absolutely practiced the religion of witchcraft.
She believes in the god and the goddess, yeah.
And she introduces a lot of ideas, and she sort of makes it cross-traditional because she talks about the different traditions, as does Mr. Buckland, that were around at that time. Most of them didn't last the course of time. They usually don't if they're not real. But you've got to have
honestly, I can't. It's funny that I agree with you. I actually think she's a lot closer than Cunningham and others are.
I don't really know what her credentials are. She talks about it in her books that she, may have some sort of tracing to Gardner's lineage. I know there's Gardnerians who say that's not true. I don't really know the truth of the pudding.
Me either.
My experience has usually been that if people jump ship, that's probably not true because it just doesn't usually happen. But, she could have been told that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's not on her necessarily. And the truth of the matter is I don't know and I don't really care. She's doing her own thing now.
Yep.
It is definitely the religion of witchcraft. She practices her own initiatory lineage. And she's been doing it for a long time, and she has a group. She used to have a group, the Black Forest Clan. Mm-hmm. I've never met her, so I don't have a personal opinion of her, and I don't really know the answer to that. So, but when she first started writing, I think she was I think she was like a housewife or something, if I remember right. It's been years, if I remember correctly. And she's always kind of done her own thing, you know. She really doesn't, she's never really been like in the pagan community. So she's an interesting character.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah,
she was never that like hog for the spotlight ever.
No.
And it's funny because I have a lot of people in my life who will say horrible things about a lot of mainstream pagan or contemporary witchcraft authors. And they say all these mean things, but they'll defend people like Scott Cunningham, or they'll defend other things like that, but they love to just dump on Silver Ravenwolf. And what's funny is when I don't, they're not my kind of books. I'll say that, I'll be honest. Especially like Teen Witch and concepts like that.
I liked
really
to ride a silver broomstick when I read it years ago.
Yeah, but the funny thing is I always ask them, I'm like, she's less of a problem with anything you're saying than these other people you're defending. I never understand why she got this sort of mass hatred, and especially in online forums and whatnot, for not being authentic, but they would defend other people who had no more authenticity in any shape, form, or fashion. And I think it literally was because she called herself Silver Ravenwolf, because it was called Teen Witch, because there was like a woman on a broomstick and to ride a silver broomstick. I think that's literally all it was. It was an aesthetic judgment.
Well, there's also this little bit of once you become successful. I mean, look at, you know, my book and how the aesthetics of that book was like, before it was ever published, thousands of people were talking about my book cover.
Yeah.
You know? So there is a thing about that. Anyway, moving on, let me pick one.
Okay, and then they've got some too, some good ones.
Why don't we do Gerald Gardner? Because no one else probably will.
This is a funny one because, like, I don't know a single witch on Instagram who's popular right now. Like the crowd that is like speaking for witchcraft right now. I mean, some of them don't even know who he is. It's just not. It makes me sad. But Gerald Gardner is fascinating. I will always defend him because of who he is. So it's one of those things. I have a sort of, I will defend my brother. Gerald Gardner is, am I going to say that I love every single thing that man wrote? Like when he was writing about the pygmy magic people in Ireland and stuff. No, I'm not going to say.
The Picts.
Yeah, none of that's true. I'm not going to argue against the fact that he made up stuff. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to say is I have a different opinion about Gerald Gardner that's very weird. And it came from a conversation that either you or Christian were having on Facebook. I think it was Christian actually, about prophets and about Crowley and about how there's a person that we all know in our group, a mutual friend who's in the OTO, who says, I follow prophets and I judge a prophet by the success of their work. So for example, look at what Muhammad accomplished, Jesus of Nazareth, and Crowley has a living religion and whatever. And he said, and I don't necessarily think that about Gardner. What's funny is I disagree completely. I think Gerald Gardner was a prophet. What I think Gerald Gardner was... We would
call it a messenger of the gods.
Yes. I'm just using a word that you would probably, resonate with as an audience. I think Gerald Gardner was a prophet. I think Gerald Gardner was responsible for helping to bring back the egregore of goddess worship in the West. I think he was instrumental in it. I think thousands of neo-pagans in modern America would not exist if it were not for him. I think so I don't really care if he got
as they burn him on the pyre.
As they burn him on the pyre, as they do all prophets, I might add. All prophets go up in flames. So that is what's so funny, is that's how I view him. So when people are like, well, what about when he said this or his crazy relationship with whoever? And I'm like, I don't care. To me, Gardner was a prophetic voice. And if it wasn't for him, I think we would not have the level of goddess worship we do in the West. And so his books, The Meaning of Witchcraft, Witchcraft Today, The Goddess Arrives, I don't really care if they're problematic. I think that they are instrumental, and I think they were seeds. And as a flower of that seed, a black flower maybe, but a flower nonetheless, I cannot attack him really. Like, I kind of love him, and I just do.
Well, as far as his work's concerned, I mean, his first, I guess, witchcraft book that was fiction was High Magic's Aid. Mm-hmm. And honestly speaking, if I was going to talk about his writing at all, I don't know. This is going to help.
We're all going like both you and I just hit the hand sign.
Hey,
did we have a vision?
Like a force field. The beginning of that book is actually kind of entertaining. I don't know if he was a good fiction writer, but the beginning of it was really insightful, and there was a lot of things in it where he's really like hinting at witchcraft culture and these different myths, and it was pretty cool. The weaving together of Morven the witch digging up her mother's knives, and then relying on a magician for a lot of the other tools and implements. And there's a lot of interesting things that went along with it. But then the tail end of the book was almost like he got bored writing it, and it became like
he's
this
not an excellent
little
writer.
kid adventure of
He's
how
not.
it ended. Like all of a sudden it just like wrapped it up all weird. But I think his witchcraft books were typical British occultism in the sense that they were sort of dry and he was very much attempting to be academic. He was a self-styled anthropologist, and he had written his books on knives, Malayan weapons, were supposedly really well respected, and he had traveled, so I thought they were very good. And what's important about them is they were the first books on witchcraft. He was the first author. He was the first witch to say, "I'm a witch." He was the first witch to appear on TV. He was the first witch to appear in the newspapers. There was so much that he did that was the first.
Yeah.
So I think that if you're going to be a modern practitioner of witchcraft, you have to realize whether you are connected to his initiatory line or not. He is directly responsible for your existence and for the fact that
the ritual structure,
even those
all of it.
witches on Instagram who are like about eyeliner, what they look like, waving crystals around and casting their spells and lighting candles, owe it to him. And yes, I do agree it could have been anyone, but he was the messenger that was chosen.
And can I make a stronger argument even than that? Because I sometimes get more involved in these nitpicky intellectual, like academic arguments that I shouldn't because it's pointless, but I do. And one of the things that drives me insane is people will say, Gerald Gardner and contemporary British witchcraft didn't bring anything new. It's just all regurgitated nonsense. They stole it from Crowley and from blah, blah, blah. Let me be very clear about something. That's patently false. And what I mean by that, I'm not even talking about, our Book of Shadows is ancient. I'm not even having that discussion. We can have that discussion later. What I'm talking about is, it was new. It was something special. So you had a long history of the Western occult tradition. What they do in the Western occult tradition, go pick up Agrippa, go pick up Trimethius, go pick up Marsilio Ficino. That's not what modern contemporary witchcraft does. We use parts and pieces of it. The circle comes from ceremonial magic, absolutely. The consecrations, whatever. I don't care. My point is then you also have pagans, right, who are out and worshiping very specific gods and who are trying to connect to something pre-Christian. Witchcraft exists in a very unique, powerful place between those worlds, where we are tapping both into the Sabbath culture of the secret goddess and the secret god, the horned god of the Sabbath, the Queen of Elfame and the hidden goddess or whatever with hidden names, and the structure and power of the Western occult tradition. Those things had not been synthesized in a unique and powerful way until they were exposed by Gerald Gardner. So to say that he did not have something special to say, or that it was just the same thing, is just a lie. It's not true. Like, it was special, it was unique, it was something beautiful, and the proof is in the pudding, people. It lasted. Like, it stuck. There are Gardnerians and Alexandrians all over the world.
All right.
Still going on.
Let's take one of theirs.
So I'm going to go back. We went over Cunningham. We got Silver Ravenwolf. Somebody had asked about... sorry, guys. There's been a lot of hello and sweet comments that we love, but I got to go back before I can... Oh, Dion Fortune. That's what I wanted to hit. Lida Diana was asking Dion Fortune.
It's not really a witchcraft book.
True.
So I really wanted to steer away from those things. Can we move on?
Okay, we don't have to do Fortune.
I really don't want to do occult books today because I really wanted to talk about witchcraft. I mean, I love Dion Fortune and her contribution to the craft.
I love her.
If we go down that rabbit hole, we do that a lot. And as Alexandrians, we love occultists. But I want to stick to witchcraft books and witchcraft authors because people who are watching this show who are new to witchcraft need to have some sort of direction. And if we make it too broad, it becomes more confusing.
That's very fair. Sometimes it gets a little tricky, though, because somebody like
it does.
Dolores was a Gardnerian.
Well, yeah.
Before she was
we're talking about witchcraft authors, so she has to have written a book about witchcraft.
About witchcraft. Okay, somebody is asking Selena Fox.
Selena Fox.
I've not read
Never read any of her books.
Yeah, I'm not...
Did she write a book?
Yeah, Selena Fox has written books.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
I know about her.
Yeah, me too. I haven't read them, though.
To me, Selena Fox is a pagan, not a witch. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I definitely respect, her dedication. And I do think she's definitely into goddess spirituality and is magical. But I may be guilty of just not knowing enough, but she really sets herself up as being like an advocate of social issues and politics, and she's really immersed in the pagan community. I don't really know of anyone in the craft who really talks about her.
Yeah. Rodriguez Mystic brought up Lois.
I've met her. She seems very nice.
Yeah. There's no judgment.
No, I could be wrong. You know, she could be whipping out a goat's head and I don't know about it.
Rodriguez Mystic brought up one of our elders, Lois Bourne, one of the elders of traditional craft. We're going to, yeah. Lois Bourne, here's what I'll say about her. A craft elder who I honor and respect. I don't think her books were as influential, unfortunately.
They weren't, but they're good.
They're good, but they just weren't as massively influential. I've read them.
She wrote them later on.
She did. And she got, I don't know, she had a very...
She missed the trend.
She did. I really, really love Lois Bourne's books. The same with Patricia Crowther, who
she did not miss the trend.
No, she didn't. She was massively influential. Coven Sense, Lit Off the Cauldron, High Priestess.
But now you're going on about a trillion different authors that may come up.
So they'll come up later, but I'm answering the Rodriguez.
This is what he does.
It is what I do. The Lois Bourne one, love her, but again, it was hard to judge her because I don't think her books were as well known.
I only had one that I've read. I think it's called A Witch Speaks, or... Am I getting that right?
It's what is it? It's Green. I've read it.
A Witch Speaks or something like that. Sorry. It was a good book, but yeah, it was a later date and it's very informative. I recommend it. It wasn't really like her bailiwick. You know, I think she did it really to support Gardner and to contribute to the tradition. Most of her life, you know, what's great about her is that she just served the gods and she absolutely loved the gods and she was dedicated. She had a lot of friends, initiates, even Alexandrian initiates who were friends with her in the end. You know, she was a great priestess, but she didn't contribute as much publicly as some of the others. So I think she kind of got shuffled and, like I said, missed the trend. But it's a very good book. I recommend it. It's part of our history.
Absolutely. So Miss Wynn or Mr. Wynn, Christopher Pinzak came up twice in the comments. So let's talk about Pinzak.
Well, he's very popular in some circles. You know, his credentials are he's a Cabot witch, you know, and I'm a fan of Laurie Cabot, and that's, you know, I don't want to go too into her in case she comes up. But his main, you know, he's got a lot of different books. He started his own publishing company. He's published a couple with Llewellyn. He has Temple 1, 2, and 3 books that he's published. They are essentially Witchcraft 1, 2, and 3. You know, it is Laurie Cabot stuff, and that's not shade. I don't know how much credit he gives her or not. I don't think he calls himself a Cabot witch, but that's his credentials. You know, he went and he took her courses. I believe he did get initiated, which he's one of the few people, because she only has one initiation. You have to take all 3 courses to get the initiation. Yeah. I think he's one of the few people that was able to get that and then go do his own thing. I don't think that that's normally allowed. I could be confused. You know, that's what he is. I think he's borrowed a little ceremonial magic and he's developed some of his own things. I think people who like him or who like his work are very similar to people who really gravitate to the Cabot tradition. Yeah. It's neat, clean, tidy, and it's very Apollonic and structured with some sort of curriculum that they can go through and they can do, and they don't necessarily have to be fully committed. It's not my craft. It's not witchcraft to me from that sense. Whereas the Cabot tradition has some elements of religious witchcraft. I'm not really sure how truly religious Pinzak is. I don't know if he's even devoted to the goddess, which you've heard me say before. If you don't believe in the goddess, to me, you're not a witch. No shade there. I'm not an expert on it. It's not my kind of witchcraft. Same. But no judgment. People seem to like him. It's not something I would gravitate towards. If I was going to go that way, I would become a Cabot. I think she's a bit more religious, and I like to go back to the source, and I like her aesthetic a lot more than what he puts forward. But I have no judgment against the system. But Pinzak is just, he's like Brian said, so I won't go on double. He's very much in that tradition of like the science of witchcraft, and it's the mental sort of systems and whatnot. It just isn't my system, so no judgment on it as a personal thing. It's just not mine, so it's not the language I speak. I want to address a comment real quick. James said someone needs to read. I don't know if you mean that tone as in like I'm saying, you know, we're saying something that's wrong, but
needs to read Aidan Kelly. I've read Aidan Kelly. Thank you very much. I've read all of Aidan Kelly's work. Aidan Kelly's an oathbreaker. Also, I mean, just an open one. And he also went and tried, he is
the guy that wrote Bull of Heaven.
Yeah, and also
the
I've read Bull of Heaven.
The Minoans detest him. I've never read it, though.
I've read Bull of Heaven, and I think the story of the Minoan Brotherhood and the story of that whole tradition, and that Lady Rhea is part of, or whatever, is very fascinating. And Basinski is a very fascinating character. It's actually an interesting book.
Oh, so she didn't write any books, he's saying.
And also this Selena Fox. You're coming off a little harsh here, dude, because I literally just looked it up, and she does have books. She wrote one for Alcoholics Anonymous, actually. I literally took
Are they witchcraft books?
Took 2 seconds. Yeah, they're based in craft. Took 2 seconds for me to look it up on Google, so calm down.
Check your facts, Mr. James.
I literally they're not major publishing books, and they're not something you're going to find like on witchcraft shelves, but...
Anywho.
Okay, Patricia Crowther did come up, so let's hit her, because Shane's...
This person has 2, one of which I forgot.
I do want to bring up her, but I thought we'd start here.
Patricia. I love Patricia Crowther's books. I absolutely adore them. I don't have a bad thing to say about it. Now, some of them get a bit weird, but I love the weirdness. She's an iconic witchcraft high priestess. She was initiated by Gerald Gardner himself. And she is highly underestimated for the fact that she really, her and her coven contributed a lot of really beautiful poetry to the craft that was passed on in different lineages. And I think that that's fantastic. And, if I was going to say anything, I'd say that Grandma is maybe the mean girl of the craft. And I say that sincerely with a blessed heart as a gay man. She really is the head cheerleader in Britain. And,
yes.
But if there was anyone in witchcraft I wish I could meet and sit down with that I haven't yet, it would be her. Don't think that's going to happen. But, I am Alexandrian.
I know.
But she probably wouldn't talk to me. But
I like Crowther. Too.
I definitely am a huge fan of her work. I loved everything she did.
I love Crowther.
And highly recommend it.
She is part of that aesthetic of our elders, the aesthetic of traditional craft. I really do. I like Crowther. I also here's one thing. For better or worse...
She did more than AA books, James. If you're listening, she wrote a bunch of books, so maybe look them up.
But I think... I think with Crowther, I respect something about her, which is she stood by, you know what I mean? She stuck to her guns. So when people started abandoning Gardner or when things got rocky or whatever, she just kept the faith. I mean, she kept the faith.
A quote.
And I love that.
John Payne, who worked with Patricia Crowther in setting up a day for Patricia. Mm-hmm. She's the only one who got one when she was still alive.
Yeah.
Because she made a comment, I suppose you'll all have to wait till I'm dead. So they set one up for her while she was still alive. So he did know her. He's passed away, unfortunately. But he said to me, to this day, Patricia sees Gerald Gardner as infallible, and no one will tell her anything to the contrary.
I like a good fanatic. I do. And I like it to my bones. So the second one Shane brought up I wanted to mention was, and actually it was on my list, funnily enough, is Vivian Crowley. I'm not going to speak too much about it. I'll let Brian say what he thinks. I will say this. I like Vivian Crowley, except for one thing, which is I do not approach craft through a Jungian lens. She's a trained Jungian. She's trained in Jungian psychoanalysis. So her approach to the Godhead, her approach to divinity is very Jungian. Now, I like that sometimes, but it's not my predominant language of approaching craft. So sometimes when I read Living Wicca, which is probably her most popular book, or anything along those lines, it's almost like we're just speaking a different language. But I will say if you do resonate, like Rosie, a mutual friend of ours who's also who's a high priestess in Alexandrian witchcraft, she really loves that language in that book. And I can understand it. We were talking about her one day, and I get it. I get that if you resonate with that psychoanalytical approach to the god and the goddess or whatever, as anima and animus and stuff, that it's powerful. So I will say that about her. If you're really into that kind of language, great choice.
Vivian Crowley was an initiate of Alexandrian craft and then later left Alexandrian craft to become an initiate of the Whitecroft Gardnerian line, which I believe is what she works with now. Mm-hmm. She may consider herself dual. Some people do. I didn't like most of her books that much. Not that I disliked them, but there was the one book, which is the one you were talking about, Wicca.
Living Wicca. Yeah.
Was it? No, it's not called Living Wicca.
Living
Wicca is a different book. It's called Wicca, something for the new millennial or something.
You're right. I've messed this up. I'm sorry, guys.
There is a Living Wicca by Scott Cunningham, I think.
She wrote Wicca, the old religion in a new.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry, guys.
I think that was enjoyed because, like Levi said, it was coming at it from a new way. She was certainly following suit with the Farrars in some respects, putting stuff out there that maybe shouldn't have been. That's on her. But I think it was being approached in a way that initiates hadn't seen in a book before, so it was impressive. I did enjoy reading that book, and that's all I have to say.
Yeah, it's been sorry, Shane, I got the name of the book wrong.
She wrote something on Celtic stuff.
She's written quite a few.
Didn't like very much.
It's been a long time since I've read Vivian Crowley, so that's why I forgot the name of it. But yeah, Wicca by Vivian Crowley, and there's one
Living Wicca is by Scott Cunningham, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Wicca, and the old religion in the new age or whatever. Like I said, and she also has written from a strictly Jungian perspective some things too. I don't dislike it. Like I said, it's just not my language.
I always recommend that you read books that were written by the original initiates who were publishing all the first books. Like if you go back to the earliest forms of witchcraft books being written, they were all published by initiates. No one else was doing it. So if you start from the 50s and move your way up through the 70s, you're usually getting better material. Now, I agree with Thorne Mooney and some of the things that some people have been saying, that we don't often recommend enough new books, and that there are a lot of things that are coming out now that are good. There's also a lot coming out now that's garbage. So
I'm actually, before we end the show, I brought it because people are asking what new things. I have a thing that I want to talk about at the end, but I'm not ready yet. Some people, let's go ahead and do this one because Tina brought her up, and we've mentioned her, but we haven't addressed her specifically. Laurie Cabot.
I read Power of the Witch, and it must have been in the 90s when I read that book. I did like it. At that point in time, I still was in that place where witchcraft was witchcraft, and I thought everyone knew it. I didn't know there was a certain stage in Brian Cain's existence where he thought everyone knew there was a god and a goddess, and everyone knew this and everyone knew that, and I didn't really know that there was something outside of that except Satanism.
My way or the devil.
So I really liked that book, and I particularly liked the Crystal Countdown. That was my first experience with Laurie Cabot's book. I think she's a good writer, and I think she's a very magical person. I read most of her books. I have not read her Book of Shadows, unfortunately, yet. But I've read all the early ones, and I think that they are informative and very magical. Her branch of the witchcraft religion is different than ours. Her credentials are partially based on the fact that she's really created something. She's created this priesthood that exists, and I think will continue after her. She was initiated by a woman from England of unknown origins.
Yeah,
that's a thing I don't know much about, but she does practice she practices one initiation in her tradition, and she teaches through various degrees. They're separate. So what we have in common is magic, and she definitely believes in polarity. I think they focus more on like gods and goddesses instead of god and goddess, but in that sort of polarity way. So it's a different thing. It resonates with some people, and definitely has been influential. I mean, you could say one of the most influential witches in modern history. She was on Oprah, as I discussed. Furthermore, she's been on a lot of other talk shows. It's sort of a big deal to get on Oprah.
It is.
She is a big deal. She's iconic, and particularly in the Massachusetts area.
So I'll say this about Laurie Cabot real quickly because Brian's said a lot about her already, and we've talked about her on the show before. I have nothing against the Cabot tradition whatsoever. Like, I think most of the people I've met in it are really nice people. I think there's a lot of magic in Laurie Cabot, and I think the proof is in the pudding. She's the Witch of Salem. It's not my language. I have a real hard time, and Christian and I have I've talked about this before, like this concept of the science of witchcraft, I just can't. Like, I just have a knee-jerk reaction against it. I'm much more into the divine theurgic aspects of witchcraft. I do not like when witchcraft is mixed with pop psychology, so like left brain, right brain things and stuff like that, because those things get disproven, which they have been, and then you're kind of left in the lurch because you've invented this whole concept of, well, if I move this part and this part of my brain activates, and then later psychology comes out and says, yeah, we said that in 1962, but it's not true anymore. And then you're kind of stuck because what do? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh shit, like we based our whole like, oh, okay.
You just pretend that didn't happen.
Or that whole thing where it's like you only use 10% of your brain. That's not true. That's a lie. So, there were literally like occult authors who used to write stuff like, now we can access the other part. No, you can't. It's not a thing.
Sapphire. You'd have to say, we're talking about witchcraft authors, so if you could come up with the author, we may or may not know who they were.
But let's go ahead and do one that is named. Brandon is asking, it's been asked in the chat 3 or 4 times, so I want to hit on it. Raven Grimassi.
Well, I thought Raven was a decent writer, so he wrote pretty good, and he did do some history. I can't say they were extremely impactful books to me, because I was already fully in the full swing of things by the time they came out. I did have an initiate from my early witchcraft years who just loved Raven Grimassi. She just thought he was the cat's meow. And I suppose I'm glad she died before I found out the truth.
Damn.
It really comes down to credentials. I thought Raven was a nice man. I've met him on several occasions. I've spoken to him on the phone. I thought he was a very nice man. But his credentials... In the end, he was living his true credentials, but he started out saying he was Gardnerian, and he claimed he was initiated by someone who ran an herb store. Well, the fact of the matter is he was never Gardnerian. Like, that's just, talked about frauds, fables. It was a fraudulent claim. He knew it was a fraudulent claim. I literally know Gardnerian priests who've walked up to him and said, we all know you're not Gardnerian. Stop saying you are. Well, fast forward, he did change his tune, and then all of a sudden he was hereditary. And so he started writing all these hereditary books. And where I thought I don't know how there must have been some magic here, because he was always able to escape just in the nick of time. So when the craft was starting to get really wise to the hereditary claims, well, then he went and started his own tradition. And there was actually a time when Christian was on the phone with him, and he said, Christian said, well, aren't you hereditary? And he said, oh, yes, but we're not doing that anymore. We're doing this thing. Let me ask you a question. If you really inherited witchcraft from your family, if you were the unicorn, and I mean really, not a horseshoe or grandma used to light candles, but if you really were brought down into the basement and grandma had a goat's head up and was like, we worship the horned one or the devil or whatever you want to call it.
You'd probably
Here's
stick to
the
it.
goddess. Here's the old book we had. We use black candles. Whatever it's going to be. Something really deep, like an actual witch cult that your family was a part of, which is what the claim was. If that was the case, would you ever give it up for anything? Probably not. So he ended his career doing their own tradition. But there were things. There was a book he wrote called Traditional Wicca, I believe it was called. And all it was stuff from Gardnerian and Alexandrian craft that he was talking about. He was never connected to any of that.
I think that's his hereditary witchcraft with the 2 brooms on it or whatever.
It wasn't that one. It was something called Traditional Witchcraft or Traditional Wicca or something like that. And it was literally like they would have the charge of the goddess, and he would talk about it.
There you go.
And then they would have another poem by Dorothy, and he would talk about it.
Fine.
I can assuredly say this was his business. And unfortunately, he was a real stain on the craft. His students were paying their mortgage. There was without turning this into a trash talk session, I was completely unimpressed. And his wife is one of the rudest, most horrible people I've ever met at a festival before. And I wasn't the only one to think that. However, that's somebody I'd have to say I don't recommend his books because he was a liar. But unfortunately, what's sad about it is he was actually a good writer, and he did his research. So if he would have just told the truth, then we wouldn't be where we are today. I've got no problem with people creating their own traditions as long as they're honest about it. You know, and that's where the sadness comes in. You know, it's the initiates aren't really judgmental about other traditions. It's about the craft has had enough of people making stuff up. That's why we're so skeptical now.
My issue with him, I think, it just isn't. It's just not good, guys. I mean, like, it's made up. Like, and I mean, I know you can argue, well, your stuff is too. It's different, though. It's just point blank.
Gerald Gardner never claimed.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything
it's very
other
different.
than he was initiated by a coven.
Yeah, it's very different. And also, the other thing is I remember he just was one of those that would not give up the goat, even when it was no longer like funny or cool or valiant. And my issue was when Ronald Hutton wrote Triumph of the Moon. You know, and there were lots of responses to that by the diehards or whatever who wanted to keep the Wiccan mythos alive. Raven Grimalsi was one of the most vitriolic haters of that, and he came out and wrote articles and stuff but based on the worst history. I mean, just out and out lies and out and out bad academics and stuff that any educated person should not engage in. And all to keep alive some sort of mystery that he wanted to be true about himself. And so that I just did not like. It left a really bad taste in my mouth about him.
They were very weird. I remember it was little things like going up to, I'm not going to get into all the stories I have, but going up to them and trying to be nice to them. And they had these little coins that were from some country that had pentagrams on them. And I just thought they were cool because I'd never seen them before. Oh, Christian, come look at these. I was trying to be nice. They literally got weird. It was like, those are ours. We don't want anyone else to sell them. Like I was just trying to steal them from my store. Okay. They were very weird. It was all business to them. And I think, as always, the proof is in the pudding. So we'll move on from that because I don't want to be too hateful.
Sapphire was following up about her concept. She had asked about green witchcraft. And if you were listening, Brian had said, what do you mean by like what authors? And she mentioned one that we sell that's popular, Anne Mora, who wrote like Green Witchcraft 1, 2, and 3 and all that. And it's the Grimoire of the Green Witch and all that. So,
well, to be honest, I've never read them. I'm assuming they're about herbalism or head witchery.
They're religious witchcraft. There's a god and a goddess.
I haven't read them.
There's 8 sabbats.
I can't really talk about it. I think there might be more than one people that use that term, though.
They do, but she's the biggest. She, her books are the one, like Barnes and Noble.
I've never read them, so I'll leave it to Levi.
I've read them.
I've made fun of the title.
They're not what we do, but I will say it's kind of, I'm in the same boat about them. I would rather somebody who was, like, let's say I was going to initiate somebody and they had read some intro books. That's going to be one I can deal with, because even though I don't agree with it and it's not my style or whatever, they have the religion, like the god and the goddess are spoken of, the 8 sabbats are spoken of, the religious cycles of the system are spoken of.
What
so
is
I'll give
it
it
you
that.
Don't like about it?
It's what does that even mean?
Yeah, I don't like the title.
You don't need to parse witchcraft down like that. I hate that.
Couldn't it just be? Well, but it's a title of a book, I suppose.
Yeah, and all witches use herbs, and on some level, like all witches use nature. Like we're all connected to nature. So Stephen brought up one I do want to hit on because it was on my list. Paul Husson, the author of Mastering Witchcraft.
Well, here's the funny thing about that. Everyone loves that book who's read it. I got it at an antique store, and I still have my original copy, and I loved it. And it was kind of like my dirty little secret, because it definitely does ring true of witchcraft in the sense that it gives you like the religion of witchcraft, but it kind of has like this dark edge to it, which was sort of a unique piece to find during the, Silver Ravenwolf years. I think that the people have started going towards more of a darker aesthetic again, so therefore that's not as essential as it used to be. But most initiates and most people who like that sort of edgy thing really like that book. And I think we should ask ourselves why in some ways. But as far as his credentials, to be quite frankly, not only do I not know, but I don't think anyone else does either that's alive. I don't know where he came up with some of that stuff. There is definitely material in there that speaks of initiatory witchcraft, but I've got no idea, to be honest with you. A lot of the stuff, like the writings on the tools, are clearly taken from the Key of Solomon, but they've been shifted a little bit in some areas, or the writing's a little bit different. And of course, we've got no meaning to what they actually mean in most cases. The aesthetic is like, here's a god and goddess, but here's the Lord's Prayer backwards. So
I know. I like it.
You know, I think we're all big fans, but honestly, I don't know his credentials. He's very quiet about his witchcraft now, and he didn't write too much about it. So
I like him though.
I will say this: when he was younger, he was a looker.
Really?
I've
never seen a picture of him when he was young.
I did. I wanted to date him, but he's not that way now.
I like Paul Huson's book though quite a bit. Quite a bit. It's one I recommend frequently. I want to ask one that's on my list because a lot of these are getting repetitive. Because I had one that I wanted to make sure.
Look at Levi judging you.
I'm always judging everyone all the time. I'm a terrible person.
I have lots of books that haven't come up yet.
Lon Milo Duquette.
Sorry, what?
Oh wait, never mind. You said you wanted to do strictly the witchcraft authors.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, because he's
I hate to be a Nazi, but
I get it.
I knew you were going to be like Pythagoras.
No, I didn't do the old ones. I kept it modern, but I do have a lot of occult people.
We can do occult books at some other time.
Yeah, because I do have a lot of occult people on here. Okay, here's one that is witchcraft. Andrew Chumbly.
I've never read any of them. I don't think anyway.
Andrew Chumbly.
Maybe I did.
He wrote the Azoetia,
No,
and the cultist Sabati and all that.
No, I didn't.
I love the poetry of it.
When did this come out?
Quite a while ago, but Three Hands Press is who controls it now, I believe. It's expensive to get your hands on anything he wrote. But the cultist Sabati or whatever, there's a lot of power in them. I agree, Lillian. I don't think it's very channeled very well in the sense that it didn't go anywhere. But I will say if you're looking for some incredible witchcraft-inspired poetry, his charges and his it's almost like channeled. Like it's psychedelic at points. It's incredibly visual, like incredibly visual. So it's like the horned god upon the throne and whatnot, and the thorns. It's beautifully written, the Azoetia. But it's a grimoire, basically. But I highly recommend it. But again, the cultist Sabati literature and whatever is very fascinating.
You have to link that to me.
Yeah, but he gets a lot of talk in a lot of forums and whatnot now because he's less. The cultist Sabati stuff became popular. Chumbly is unfortunately, I believe he passed. Yeah, he passed. Who's one of yours?
Well, if maybe pull out a real weird one, Hans Holtzer.
Which one is that?
Oh, you don't know Hans Holtzer? Oh, I got one Levi doesn't know.
No, I know that name.
He wrote a lot of witchcraft and occult books and was
he's Austrian.
Yes, he wrote a lot of them. What most people don't know is he was also Alexandrian. He did become an Alexandrian initiate at one point in time.
Oh, he wrote novels too.
Yes, he wrote. God, now I'm going to think. I think it's just called Is it just called The Witches?
He wrote Murder in Amityville.
There may be more than one. I don't know.
He was a parapsychologist from Austria.
I had a initiate come to me with claiming that he was downline from Hans Holtzer, and I immediately didn't think it was real. And when I went and talked to some older Alexandrians, I was told that Hans Holtzer wasn't a secret initiate. Yeah, he was absolutely initiated. And so he wrote this book called, I think it's just Witches, and it's this big giant coffee table book that I still have. It's quite thick, and it has
he has one called Wicca, The Way of the Witches, 1979.
That may be a different title of the same.
That's cool though.
The one I have just says Witches on it. But they do retitle some of these books. So it might be the same, but it has this whole coven, and it looks very Alexandrian. They're like sometimes wearing white robes, and they go through all these rituals. And there's even a ritual in there that I actually did once, which was like, I think it was a protection spell or a love spell to Diana, and it's all the stuff you do with the chalice. But just those weird 70 icons that we don't think about very much anymore. No one would know who he is now, probably.
Yeah, and there's a ton. He wrote a crap
he has
ton of mass market
is
paperbacks.
My point up to that. He actually was involved in something.
The Aquarian Age, Ghosts That Walk in Washington. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Okay, give me another one.
Another one. Hold on. Here's one that I've only read one of his books, Michael Harrison.
Let me look it up.
I've shown you the book I liked, and you kind of wrinkled your nose, so I wonder what you think about it.
Did I?
The one I read is called The Roots of Witchcraft, and I really, really like it. He explores a lot of, it's not just trial record witchcraft, but he actually goes into, some of the modern rituals and tries to explain,
the roots of witchcraft, yeah.
Yeah. He tries to explain where they came from, and I think he's just got a real sort of interesting way of going about it and addressing sort of the trial record things and modern witchcraft and sort of weaving them together and being speculative about it. So
of course you love it. It's from the 70s.
An interesting book.
Yeah. Brian loves that.
His credentials, though, I do not know. I don't know his credentials.
So I had one. Phillip Hesselton. So
I have him too.
Yeah, Phillip Hesselton. So he wrote, if you don't know him, he wrote The Roots of Witchcraft. He wrote Witch Father of the History of
I've
Gerald
only
Gardner.
read Witch Father.
And Doreen Valiente's biography, which is fairly recent. That's him too.
Read that one.
The Cauldron of Inspiration.
Yeah, I never got that for some reason. I never got it. I did get the
It's good,
Charge
actually.
of the Goddess that was released, but I might have it. I never. So Witch Father. Here's what I'll say about him. He really did a lot of research, and I very much commend him on that. He's definitely a researcher, and he definitely writes like an academic. I thought, it's very dry from my perspective, but it is really good research, and he really attempts to look into like some of these facts about Gerald Gardner and the New Forest Coven that are interesting, speculative as all they remain. There's some real interesting facts about them. He comes up with some evidence that supports the idea that there was a New Forest Coven and who some of those members might be. His credential is that last I knew, he was a second-degree Whitecroft Gardnerian. So.
I like him. I really enjoyed Witch, the biography of Doreen Valiente that he wrote.
I think he might be connected to Vivian Crowley, but I'm not sure.
I think, Ronald Hutton is. No, you're right, it is him. I can't remember, to be honest. All the names run together after a while, guys. All those British names run together, sorry. But Hesselton, I like Hesselton. I do. I like his books quite a bit.
That's strange.
I know, right? I know. So
look who you be finding on the internet.
Dorothy Morrison. Somebody's asking. She's come up twice. I want to make sure we get her in.
It's been a really long time since I looked over in her books. Dorothy is a great writer. She really is a no-nonsense personality and very magical. People really like her books. She's got kind of a southern sassy style to her.
Yeah, people love that it's funny. Yeah.
Her credentials really are that she was initiated in something called Georgian Wicca, I think they call it. Which is an American brand of witchcraft. It doesn't have a connection to what we do. It's its own line, but it's stylized by, I think it's one of those things where they took published materials, and it's definitely the religion of witchcraft, started their own covens, and they did get their own line going. Mm-hmm. It's called Georgia. She's no longer active in that, but I think that that's the extent of her credentials, other than just her self-developed magical practice.
Yeah. But yeah, we sell her books here. Yeah. Sybil Leek.
Sybil Leek, she's an icon, isn't she? And that's what makes it really hard, because you look at this person who's iconic. She did a lot of back in the days, occult books. It might be like Sybil Leek's Telepathy, or Sybil Leek's Palmistry. These were actually books. Sybil Leek's this, Sybil Leek's that. Her first book was Diary of a Witch. I think it was 100% made up and a lie. I don't think she's from a family of witches.
No, me either.
I don't think her grandmother was a Russian witch who ran a coven. I mean, I loved reading it when I read it. And when I read it, I believed it. But, I don't believe it now. There are a lot of people that claim to be lineage to her. I think most of those are lies. I think that there is something that exists maybe from her, somebody that sat on her chair once. I don't know. I'm skeptical. But she published in a book called White Witchcraft, her working tools, which were Gardnerian, that had already been published. So, she was just taking a piece. I think there's a big reason why she really never published her practice of religious witchcraft, because I don't think she had much of one.
That's fair.
I think she was very magical and very psychic.
I don't think she had staying power, though.
Well, she did. We're still talking about her.
We are, but honestly, I don't know anyone my generation or younger who knows who she is.
Oh, probably not.
Nobody.
But she's iconic, and
she just died from the cultural conversation in a way that not even our elders did.
She moved from Britain to America. Most people don't know that. She was. I don't think she hurt witchcraft. She promoted witchcraft in a positive way. She promoted goddess worship. She promoted magic. She definitely did work in her own coven. Maybe there was magic in her family and she, colored the soup. I don't know. But, is it possible I'm wrong? Sure. But that would be iconic to find out. I mean, we've been looking for that, pre-Gardnerian witch cult for a long time now, and the fact that it hasn't manifested means that the information of its existence is either not available because it's gone extinct or it never existed at all beyond the imagination. So,
but yeah, I honestly hear no one on social media talk about her.
Oh, I've had people recently who've told me they're her downline.
But I meant like in the sort of like, I don't know, I don't think she's part of, I hate to say this, and this is going to, maybe this is me, I don't think she's part of the future conversations about witchcraft the way that other people will be.
No, but I think she's always going to be a part of the history of witchcraft. You can't get rid of it, and it'll always be accessible to find out.
Oh yeah, she'll always be there, but I just don't think she resonates for some reason. I don't know why.
And she did. And what's interesting about her is that, where she lived was the New Forest of England. That is actually where she lived. She owned a store there. It is a bit weird. So who knows? Maybe she did have some sort of connection to something, but, if it is true, it's never come out, but I don't think it was her grandmother from Russia.
No. It's the same thing with Susanna Budapest's story about, her grandmother from Hungary or whatever.
I love how Levi just brings up authors we're not talking about.
It was related to what was said.
He does this in all things.
I'm so sorry.
Like, what if we were going to talk about Z Budapest? She's on my list. He's ruined it.
Do you want to talk about?
No, you ruined it.
We're not going to talk about
this. This is what he does. Budapest. Yeah, now we're not even going to talk about her.
Okay.
Or her not witchcraft.
Is it my turn or yours? It's yours, I think.
Let's talk about Z Budapest.
Let's talk about Z Budapest. I knew it was going to happen. Z Budapest, here's what I'll say about her. She's
crazy.
Yeah, the thing is Z Budapest, it's funny because she was instrumental in getting anti-psychic and anti-magical practitioner laws revoked in the United States.
She helped our tarot reading abilities.
She is basically persona non grata anymore.
She's nuts.
In the community. I mean, honestly, I don't know a single bookshop that will still carry her books. I don't know.
She's not practicing witchcraft. My entire, my entire belief system about witchcraft is it could never exclude male or female, and that's been since my early days. So right off the bat, I didn't consider lesbian practices or likewise gay practices to be witchcraft when they excluded the other. I saw them as priesthoods. I saw them as valid, magical, mystery cults, but it wasn't witchcraft to me because in witchcraft you can't do that. And I still believe that. So... And her witchcraft was something she created all on her own. And she's like super crazy, like feminist. And it's come out nowadays. She hates men. She hates transgendered.
Good job.
Did it right.
You did it right.
Transgendered women. She's just really, every time a woman has sex with a man, she's being raped. There's something wrong with her.
She said some intense... radical
doesn't mean nothing's good's come out of it, but yeah, I mean, she's really for those like fat lesbians who cry all the time.
Don't be hateful,
and who
Brian.
have mental
My
problems.
God,
that's what I think.
The thing about it is like I think
I actually saw a documentary where all her followers were fat lesbians crying about their sexual abuse.
Not all of them.
No, they were.
Just most of them.
No, it was like all the ones on the thing.
It's just most of them. The thing about Susanna Budapest is this. It's just not a part of the conversation anymore. Like, to the point that, like, she's so problematic in so many ways that outside of the small world of strictly...
You're around telling people my husband cursed her with his penis.
Okay, wow.
She's crazy. I'm not going to say what he said to inspire that, but
but no, I think she's just so removed now from the community because of things she said and communities she's attacked or whatever that it's almost like, what's the point? I think the only people who still really have truck with her are people who have connection to the original Susan B. Anthony Coven and whatnot.
Now, we didn't talk about any of your books because we haven't read them. Though one of them was called Medicine Women or something like that.
I think that was hers, yeah.
Yeah, I had friends who read them.
But she's she's just very removed now from the conversation because of things she said.
I mean, why would we read them? I think it's your turn. Gone through a lot.
Yeah, we've actually done a lot, which I'm proud of. I had to take a few off my list because they weren't witches, but whatever.
I think it's important we stick to the nucleus of the conversation.
Sarita Deste.
Oh, she's on my list too.
Me too.
Her most iconic book, To Light a Sacred Flame, right? About Hecate.
Sacred Fire, isn't it?
Sacred Fire, thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't read that, so I'm sorry, I haven't read it. I have a really weird anti-trend thing. It's me. But I have read her book on the Kaliak Christian, got that for me for Christmas winter solstice present a few years ago. I thought it was really engaging. I can tell you what her credentials are is that she's an Alexandrian high priestess. She no longer practices Alexandrian witchcraft, but, you know, once witch, always witch. And so she's got those credentials, and she's actually quite the academic. You know, she really does her research.
She's incredibly
she's
intelligent.
Extremely intelligent. And she lives in Glastonbury, and she has her own publishing company. I think it's
Avalonia. Yep.
Avalonia Books. Great work, and really embraces the classical world, and we have that in common.
She had a long-standing relationship with David Rankin.
She used to have these videos on witchcraft where she talked about Alexandrian witchcraft that were brilliant. I think when she decided to leave the tradition formally, which I hate it when people do that because I think it's really tacky, just go. And I've already told her this, so I'm not talking behind her back. I think that she took those videos down and they were really good. So it's unfortunate.
I do love her books, though. I like Sarita's books a lot.
And we like her.
I like Sarita quite a bit.
She's a priestess.
Fantastic author. I really enjoy her books on Hecate. They're brilliantly researched. She really talks about the Chaldean oracles and all these other things. And I think she, the book she wrote with David Rankin and things like that, I recommend them. Like when people ask me, what do you think about Sarita's books? I always say,
yeah, they're good
read them.
books. I haven't read all of them.
I've read a lot of her books.
I should read that other one.
Sarita's a really good example of somebody who can write from an academic place, but for a public audience. Because I think in the occult world and the witchcraft world...
She's one of the people who wrote a blurb on my book.
Yes, and the thing about Sarita, and the reason I brought her up is because, I don't want to seem like I'm being sycophantic to Sarita, but because I do really like Sarita, but she's this amazing thing that doesn't exist a lot, which is in the witchcraft world, I get really frustrated because you have, but this is why I like Brian's book too, because it's in the middle, you're speaking to both areas too. People either go full-blown academic so that it's basically not going to be accessible to modern people at all. It's basically just for an academic community. Or they water it down so much and just shred it to pieces that it's just like nothing.
Boring.
And I think Sarita's in that really nice place where it's very academic and it's heavily researched. And she actually is a huge world traveler, so she's been to all these places in Turkey and Greece. But it's still accessible. And like Brian does this too in addition to witchcraft, where we're talking about the history of the witch cult or whatever, but here's what it looks like in practice. So I think those kind of books are important. It's one of the reasons, I brought her up, is because like we have there's a huge dearth of those kind of books that can do both.
I've got one because we cannot forget it.
Yes.
Maxine Sanders.
Well, she's only wrote the one, right?
I think so.
Witch Queen.
I think she's working on another book.
Firechild.
Firechild.
Yeah, Firechild. I'm gonna love Maxine.
But
are you kidding?
That's more than Alex ever wrote.
That's true. Yeah. Are you kidding? Of course I'm gonna love Maxine. Maxine is one of the most important living witchcraft elders. I adore Maxine. So.
But as far as her book, which unfortunately now it's out of print, you could probably still get it. I mean, it was everywhere. You could get it used or whatever. It's great. It's a sort of a story of her life, and it teaches you a lot about Alexandrian tradition, and you get a lot of historical points and references about her and Alex's journey and her journey. So I thought it was a really good book. I really enjoyed reading it. Everyone I know really enjoyed reading it. Maxine is an occultist, so she decided that work was done.
Yeah, she's done.
I don't know what that means really. She may put it out of print again at some point. I don't know. But I do believe she's working on another book, and I'm very excited if that comes out because I actually think she's a really good writer. She's got great. She's actually great even in emails and things like that. She's just a good writer.
She's got a great turn.
She writes as well as she speaks.
But yeah, of course I love Maxine. Margot Adler.
Well, I only ever read the one book, Drawing Down the Moon. I really think that as a writer, she's good. She was smart, very American. She's a Long Island, I believe Long Island initiate. Or was she California? Ooh, I get confused. She is connected to the California line, but I don't know. That's confusing. I think she's connected because she was higher up there. But she is in the California lineage, but she may be I don't know. I don't know that. She's Gardnerian though, or was. That book is really overstated now. Most of the traditions that she talks about in it don't even exist anymore. So I don't know why it's still recommended. Like at the time it was iconic because it kind of was like this guide to the pagan fair world and all the different traditions that were out there.
It's dated. It's
really irrelevant. I've heard new people talking about it. I'm like, you realize 90% of what she talks about there doesn't even exist anymore.
I loved it when I read it, and it's funny because I haven't thought about that book in a long time, but I loved it.
Here's how I turned a goat into a unicorn, which most people would consider abusive now.
Like, I loved it when I read it, but it's funny because Brian's right. It is such a glimpse into a time. So like, I loved it, and I think Margot Adler was a good person, and she was a journalist, and she was a progressive, and she was kind of a really cool person, But I agree with Brian that like reading it now, it's funny because he's right. There's a ton of stuff in that doesn't even like apply at all anymore. It's important, I guess, historically, but
I just don't know why it's recommended now.
Yeah, well,
I can see why someone would want to flip through it as a curiosity, but I've literally seen people recommend it as like the must-read witchcraft book.
I've seen that too,
and I don't get it.
Maybe it's because she was a journalist and she's
got no
cred,
relevance.
You know.
Now I've seen her speak, and I actually thought, well,
she was on public radio for years. That
she's
was her
a good speaker.
Career.
I mean, she got a little annoying at the end because she said some things. Here's the problem with when early American witchcraft. I remember her talking about. She's like, we got these rituals, and they were horribly written rituals, and we tried to put them together, but they were actually just really horrible rituals. And I'm pretty sure she's talking about Gardner witchcraft, which shows me right off the bat that she didn't have the training to go along with the Book of Shadows, because they are written horribly. Because if you know how to actually do them, that wouldn't be an issue. So, because the Book of Shadows is like a big old hint book.
Exactly.
So, yeah, she kind of became paganified. I don't know.
Okay.
But the book, I'm not that impressed with the book. At its time, though, it was great because it was like, oh, these are all the possibilities.
Yes, I agree.
In modern paganism.
At its high tide, it was important. So here's a huge name that we've not addressed yet that's come up a couple of times.
I keep asking about that.
I know.
Do it. I can't do it.
Well, we did at the beginning. I literally praised it.
Well, you could praise it more.
I will. But before we get to that, because I will do it for you.
I think they're joking.
Is a name that's come up a few times in the comments, Starhawk.
Well, we said we wanted to talk about witchcraft authors.
Oh, come on. She literally calls it what you said, people who use the term.
She's branched off from Z Budapest. The difference is she began to include the male and was a more progressive form of Diana witchcraft, Diana Wicca. I honestly don't consider her lineage to be witchcraft.
Was she trained by Susanna?
Yes, she comes from that.
But reclaiming is her thing now, right?
She added the male in and became less psycho.
The reclaiming tradition is hers.
Interestingly enough, we had a branch of her witchcraft in Spokane, Washington. And there was a woman named Rowan who was very influential early on in the 70s in Spokane, Washington, who was a lesbian who ran a lesbian group. My friend that I talk about all the time about how his mother had books was in her group. Starhawk stayed in her home. So so she's sort of like, she's iconic. I've heard she's an extremely boring speaker. But no personal shade. I don't really consider what she's talking about to be witchcraft. And her books are like, the spiral dance is awful. It's like literally just like chanting about women's genitalia. It's a bit strange to me. It's aesthetically not pleasing. I realize she was influential to a lot of people, but no, it's not my language, as Levi would say.
Yes.
She basically is a part of that same lineage, but what she's done is she's been like, let's not be feminazis, let's include men, let's make this more progressive. So she sort of like went back towards witchcraft, which I commend her for that, but her credentials lie in the world of Z Budapest.
Yeah, and also...
and I don't like her books.
See, this is also, somebody's mentioning here, I always thought she was more influenced by the fairy tradition, by Anderson's, and somebody's saying this on here.
Originally, she came from Z Budapest. She may have fringed upon that, I don't know.
Yeah, because I thought she was Anderson's.
Maybe it was both, I don't know.
I thought she was the Andersons. Yeah. But that was a big name.
No, she talks about it in her own book, that she started out in lesbian witchcraft.
Yeah.
And the fairy tradition has nothing to do with that. So maybe she did that later.
Could be.
Or maybe she worked with him later. I don't know. It's been so many years since she's been relevant. I could be getting foggy. It is true. She's not really relevant anymore.
Beautifully shaded.
Nobody talks about her anymore.
It's like a cherry blossom garden, just lightly shaded.
Yeah, it's right there. Originally Z,
then Anderson's. Okay. The reclaiming tradition is very political. So, they're very interested in ecology and stuff like that. So I can get behind that on some level, but it's not my thing.
Sapphire. Tom Cowan wrote about Celtic books. He didn't write about witchcraft books, though he did help Laurie Cabot with one of her books, and I believe she despises him for some reason.
So we can talk a little bit, because they're coming up in this conversation, because somebody said, what about the Bloodthorn, what is it, the Thorns of the Blood Rose by Victor Anderson, or basically the fairy
Wow,
writers.
you said that really fast.
The fairy tradition writers. So Victor's books, his poetry.
Which fairy tradition?
Feri, the Andersons.
I get confused.
Yeah, not...
we've got one here.
Not the Radical Fairies, not the gay organization. The Feri, usually it's spelled different ways. But
my belly dance teacher is apparently very senior in the fairy tradition here, but I don't know what it's Dianic-ish, I think.
But the original fairy stuff is the Andersons. I've read that material. The Andersons and the fairy tradition, sort of the big... It's interesting.
It's American.
It is American, from the Pacific Northwest, close to where you're from. Yeah, it's not Fairy-Faria either. Lillian's right. It's its own thing. The fairy tradition is actually quite large and influential because you have Storm Fairy Wolf now. You have the Blue Rose School of Witchcraft. We sell books like the Iron Pentacle and whatever. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, I thought Devin Hunter was influenced by fairy as well.
He claims he was Gardnerian, but he's lying.
Yeah, but I think he claims fairy too, or does he claim?
He's dating Storm. Or was,
yeah. But they're all, that tradition's actually pretty large and popular. I do not know sometimes how to approach that tradition because I feel like every book I read about it says something different. I think they thrive on radicalism.
I know people who are involved in it.
It's a little too chaotic for me, to be honest.
It has nothing to do with what I'm doing. So I am guilty. It's not that I'm a snob in the sense that I hate everything that's not a part of the line of succession, but I don't actively pursue learning about every tradition out there that claims to be witchcraft, because if it's not a part of something historically relevant, or if it hasn't been put in my face, why would I research it? I don't need to know about every tradition.
Yeah.
I know people who are involved in it. I know it's kind of old in this country, but it's kind of like we were talking about the Georgian tradition. It's a self-started American tradition that, who knows, maybe 100 years from now it'll be very relevant. But I don't know much about it.
He wrote letters, Victor,
or if it has anything to do with fairies.
Victor Anderson is a contemporary of Gerald Gardner, and he actually exchanged letters with Gardner, which we know for a fact now.
I think this is the one that, off the cuff, there's these weird rumors and things, but I don't know if I believe them. But it's Rosalind Norton from Australia wrote letters to Gerald Gardner, so.
Yeah, exactly.
People from all over the world wrote letters to
Victor was
also...
a
book and he'd been on TV.
Victor was really into... He was like Scott Cunningham. He was really into Hawaiian stuff.
I emailed Brian Cain in 2020.
So,
who cares?
That Hawaiian stuff is in the writings too. So yeah, the fairy writers, a lot of you had mentioned them on here too. A lot of the fairy tradition writers like Victor Anderson and Storm Fairy Wolf or whatever, and Devin Hunter or whatever. It's just, as we would say, not my language. But they have their own system. So... I will say, Lillian's asking if there were connections to Gerald. I can say that
I don't believe so.
I think
that's a very common claim with American self-starter groups. I've heard the rumor that Gerald Gardner visited the area where the Georgian tradition was, and so therefore he might have started it. That's in every one.
The reason I believe it with Victor is because Victor was trying to say it didn't happen. Victor was saying he had inherited witchcraft. And then it came out that he had been writing to Gerald.
Came out by who?
His wife. Mm-hmm. And so basically, the reason I believe it's because he didn't want it to be true. He was trying to say, no, I had all the witchcraft.
Just because you're writing to Gerald doesn't mean you got initiated. If he would have gotten initiated by British witches, he would have claimed that.
Oh, he didn't claim that.
Yeah.
He was claiming hereditary.
Yes, but I'm saying there's no actual connection. I'm not saying they didn't communicate. Gerald Gardner had been on TV. People wrote him from all over the world.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything.
The Andersons were not, they're just not my world. So, that's all I would say. Do you have one?
I think Levi's trying to get me off the hate train.
It got a little intense there. I feel that.
Well, because you keep machine gunning these people out who need to be called out sometimes.
Brian's like, I need time to be able to destroy people. Respect
I'm not trying
my
to destroy
space.
people. This is about people that, we've said a lot of good things and we've said a lot of bad things. Let's talk about Thorne Mooney.
Oh, I like Thorne. I used to love watching her videos on YouTube. I
think she thinks I'm a weirdo. I really do. I've got this. It may be something I've developed in my mind, but I think she thinks I'm rather strange. And that Hexfest she visited, I was really weird. Because I had been drunk for 2 weeks. number one.
Okay, wow.
B,
We'll talk about that later.
I had people visiting who were making me uncomfortable, who were at the festival, and I had a lot going on. So every time she saw me, I was like dressed up like a rock star with like big sunglasses on and a glass of wine and probably half conscious. I didn't really get a chance to, actually, if you can ask Levi, most of the time I'm very aware, though there was this time he had to bring me to a class when maybe it was a bit problematic.
I remember this.
I was like, lead me.
Take me there, please. I like Thorne quite a bit. I've always enjoyed her videos.
We were both fans of Thorne Mooney's YouTube videos before she ever wrote a book, and she wasn't as well known. And I don't know if she knows this, but I think her original fan base was mostly initiates, because that's who I always heard about her from, because we knew she was Gardnerian, and she would just be like another version of me with this glass of wine in her hand, which she actually did before I did ever on YouTube. She would have a glass of her wine in her hand, and she would just like be mean, like fabulously mean.
Intelligently
mean. Are you saying I'm not intelligent?
Yes, you are.
I think because now she's, my only criticism is I feel like she's trying to be too nice and she's trying to please everyone and be good. And in fact, sometimes it's made me feel bad about myself, because I'm like, why am I not that nice? Am I mean? Am I the mean one?
Yes. Next question.
But now he's worse than I am.
Not true. Next question.
But we're a huge fan of hers, and I really liked her book, Traditional Wicca. I don't like the name of it, but it's Llewellyn, and they do tend to push that name. She may have had no control over that. I don't know. But it's a really good book, and it has a lot of really good content. She's a good author. Obviously, I don't agree with everything she says, but we're of the same religion. She's her credentials are she's a high priestess in the Long Island tradition of witchcraft. I believe Raymond Buckland wrote the foreword for her book.
Yeah, before he died.
Not Maxine Sanders, but it's pretty good. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan. If I had any advice to her, I'd say don't martyr yourself to the pagan community, because they will use you as a martyr, and it won't end in your favor. I think anyone who does that is wasting their time. Be a witch. Don't be afraid to offend people. But she never asked me for advice.
I really like her, though.
Yes, we're both huge fans.
Yeah, big fan. Yeah. I really, really like Thorne.
I'm actually protective of her, because I think she's got a sensitive side. But I also think she's got an evil side that she's concealing. And I'm quite sure if I can get her alone, then I'll find out the truth.
Basically, Brian's trying to make Thorne Mooney Sith.
I think she might already be.
He's just like, you don't know the power of the dark side. I do feel that sometimes we are, like Alexandrian Witch, we've talked about this before, Alexandrian Craft is the Sith. Like, we're the ones in the corner, like, have you tried the red lightsaber? I mean, like, maybe a little. That
lady's lightsaber's at least purple.
Like, maybe a little. We're always the ones in the corner that's like, yeah, the Force.
That's one I didn't have.
Yeah. I didn't either, but it's just...
Oh, no, I did have. Sorry, I did.
Yeah, Rodriguez Mystic. Brian's pointing to one that Rodriguez Mystic brought up. Fred Lamond. He wrote 50 Years of Wicca. The thing about him is I think he's fascinating because he has a glimpse into Gardnerian witchcraft that is very old. He's besides Patricia, he's the oldest. He just died, but
Lois died first, and then he died.
Yeah, and then he passed away as well. But he's one of the oldest. My issue with him coming up in the not issue, but my comment on him coming up in the conversation is I don't think he was that influential. Like his books are very, very rare. Like, I mean, they just did not have a big impact at all. Like
we honor him,
but I honor him.
He
yes.
was, I mean, obviously it was, he wasn't very influential. I don't think most people know who he is outside of initiatory witches.
Yeah, initiatory witches.
He's actually quite brilliant. And there's this video that he does that I share with Levi, and it's like you're watching the whole thing, and it's like the entire time it's like so good that you're just like, oh my God, like this guy just everything is just perfect. And then the last 10 minutes, he like goes crazy and talks about aliens and weird stuff.
It's always aliens that
and
ruin
robots
the cult.
Or something weird. I don't know. He like loses. It's like they put him on TV too long. In the last 10 minutes, he lost his mind. But no, he's very good. He did meet Alex. He did meet Maxine. He met a lot of. He wasn't a fan of Alex. He did say he had a lot of power. Too much power and didn't know what to do with it or something like that. What he says, yeah. But a big fan of Maxine's. I think he really had a front row seat, and I'm glad he contributed his voice in the later days.
I'm glad that we have the books. Yes. That's what I'll say. I'm really glad. I think I will say he's a dissenter. So like, he doesn't say anything negative about Patricia or anything like that, or Doreen, but he does say that the priestesses that carried on the Gardnerian tradition were not always, like there was a mythology. He does sort of call out the mythology that was built out around them about these, not Patricia in particular. I'm not picking on her.
There's a bit of sour grapes in there somewhere. Something went on at some point that he's not talking about, but there's a bit of sour grapes in there somewhere, I think. Yeah.
And he does sort of, he's an interesting dissenting voice who kept the faith, though. I will say that. He kept the faith.
He definitely is a goddess worshipper.
Yeah, he kept the faith all the way to the end. So for that, I'm grateful. I had a couple, my list is digital because it's time.
That's the one we should probably cover, but they've got a lot on there.
Which one?
Can you not read my writing?
Yeah, no. Margaret Murray.
I don't know why I had you say it. I could have said it. I think because it was your term. So
yeah, I had Margaret Murray on my list too because she's interesting because she was massively influential without being a practicing occultist.
That we know of.
But she was an academic. She was trained in Egyptology and she wrote about Egyptology before she switched to write about the witch cult. The witch cult in Europe, which is the book that heavily inspired the contemporary witchcraft revival. If I had to say the works that inspired our witchcraft elders the most, I would say it would be Robert Graves' The White Goddess, Margaret Murray's Witch Cult in Europe, and Fraser's The Golden Bough. Those would be the three. And I'm sorry, the fourth would be Leland.
Robert Graves is practically from The Golden Bough.
And Leland. Yeah. And, I would end Leland, the Gospel. But Margaret Murray was an anthropologist.
Maybe The Golden Dawn, but that's not really a book yet.
Yeah, no. I have issues with Miss Murray. I don't know what to say here because I feel like we're going to disagree here. I think Murray was wrong about pretty much everything. But this is a big but. Oddly enough, I'm convinced in a philosophical way that things can be spiritually true without being historically true, and that's going to get a lot of raised eyebrows, I know, but there is such a thing as a truth, and there is such a thing as a fact, and those words are not synonyms. So do I think what Margaret Murray wrote was true in a spiritual sense of the continuation of the great goddess is part of the Western story? Yes. Do I think it is factual? No.
Well, so here's where Levi and I will diverge. She wrote a lot of books. We won't talk about her. He already spoke about her Egyptology. So her Egyptology teaches us that among her peers, she functioned from that expertise. Mm-hmm. They embraced her work on that. So she was academically sound in her field. This is a highly educated woman. She was academically sound in that field. Now, I think there's a lot of flaws, and of course we got to look at which book. The two that primarily we would be talking about is the witch cult in Western Europe, and then of course the God of the Witches, which are two separate works. So we'll focus primarily on the witch cult Western Europe, because I think that's the one most people think about. There's obviously a lot of flaws in it. Like everything she wrote about Joan of Arc, that was her big faux pas, in my opinion, because it was like, maybe Joan of Arc was a witch, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of stuff in there that was speculative that I don't agree with. But if we were going to go and look at like most works in anthropology and archaeology of that time period, a lot of it's debunked now. That's how history and science works.
Yes.
So when I think that I believe, or my way of looking at her general hypothesis, which if it was rewritten now, was that perhaps some of the stuff recorded within witch trials was not just delusion. Perhaps some of it was continued pagan practice that was still going on and being dubbed witchcraft. Now, the general hypothesis that it was like one big witch cult, obviously, that's probably not true.
Yeah.
I do also agree with the fascinating notion that she considered that perhaps witchcraft was a fringe of what she called the Dianic cult. because there is some evidence that may have occurred in new authors and writers who are writing about that now. So I think that she was somebody who had an academic mind, who was a woman talking about witchcraft. It was the 1930s, and she had a lot of male peers, and she was like, probably ended her career in some ways. But I think that the general hypothesis, if you were to go in and take the work and reword it, and you were to say, okay, here's a witch trial, here's these things in this witch trial, what things could actually have been true in that culture? Like Susie made a poppet. Were they making poppets back then in that place? There were a lot of things that could have really been looked at differently, or even how I approached it in the sense that, well, what we do really looks like a mystery cult. Mystery cults did exist. Could they have existed in some weird way within Christianity? So I think the hypothesis was okay, and I think there's a lot of information in there that is actually historically accurate, because it wasn't like she was making it up. These were real things. But some of it was skewed.
And the other thing is we now have better scholars. So like,
and that's probably true of everything.
So we don't need this. I get a little like cockeyed when certain initiates and are like, they're just so stuck on her because she wrote the introduction for Gardner, because Gardner loved her. Yeah, but we can move on now. So like, you can read Carlo Ginzburg, you could read Emma Wilby.
I think you should still
read Ava Pox. You can read the actual scholars who are saying that there was probably organized pagan worship going on in certain places. That yes, there is something to the witch trials, but they're not doing what she did, which was just to believe them like, lock, stock, and barrel and move on.
I think at that time people still thought the Druids built Stonehenge.
So they did, and it's not true. So like,
it's really just the advancement of
so
academia.
You don't need her anymore.
It's an important work. I think it should be read because you can see the influence, and you can see how it impacted some of those early people. Like, most likely the people in the New Forest Coven had read her books.
Yes.
Most likely. So I'm somewhere in between where Levi is, and I think he's taking a hard academic stance to it.
Yes.
But I don't think it's completely irrelevant. Like when she talks about a witch trial, it's not like she made up the witch trial. Her opinion about it is her opinion about it, whether you agree or not agree.
And I think it is important. I will agree with Brian. It's important to read her because of how influential she was on the early contemporary witchcraft revival. So yes, she's important in that sense. But even for somebody like Carlo Ginzburg, who basically was accused in academic circles sometimes of trying to do
but once again, you've jumped onto an author, so let's pick him.
It's about Murray, though. I'm talking about Murray. Because mine too. Carlo Ginzburg said, he was basically attacked. People were saying, you're doing the same thing Murray did. And
So did Reginald Scott hundreds of years before.
Yes. But Carlo Ginzburg really attacked her. Not attacked, but also, oddly enough, in some small way defended her. So it's interesting to see that play.
Because I don't think her entire work is irrelevant. I actually think some of her work is like accurate and good. Some of it's not. That's true of any work, really, at that time.
But she's also not like... she's not doing it maliciously. So, I mean, like, I have no shade against Margaret Murray. Like, I think she's influential in the history of witchcraft. I don't think she was correct. So I think that we need to read her to understand the way things developed in this religious revival of goddess worship. But I tend to look for the spiritual truths in things. So it's the same way that you can be a Christian and not believe that Noah's flood literally happened. Most Christians who are educated don't. You can be a Christian and not believe in a 7-day creation. Most Christians don't, including old ones like St. Augustine, for God's sakes. So like, I can look at Margaret Murray and the history of the Dianic cult, which I actually spiritually believe is true. That Diana lived as the great goddess in Western Europe without believing her.
I believe in this in some weird way. I believe it's extremely possible that there was a Dianic cult that existed within Christianity, but I don't necessarily think it was big.
Yeah.
It may have just been in Italy. It may have been in Naini, but I think that the story of that, carried on.
Agreed.
And it's a part of our modern myth. But
Brian and I both kind of secret.
I am writing another book, but it probably won't come out until 21, and Levi's book will come out first, which is going to be about astrology.
Yeah, mine will be out.
We're about to sign the contracts. He's going to be published by our press, Warlock
Super
Press.
excited. Okay, so we've only got 7 minutes left, and a bunch of authors just got dropped.
Right, let's do theirs.
Let's be real quick. Jason Mankey. Greg mentioned Jason Mankey. We know Jason. He's been at Hex Fest. I've been on a panel with Jason. I really like Jason. I disagree with some of his opinions about, Jason runs a Gardnerian coven, but also a non-lineaged sort of just pagan coven. I don't really understand that personally. But I've never had a problem with any of Jason's books. I read his blogs. Brian was on his show recently. I listened in on that. So I like Jason quite a bit, yeah.
I haven't read all of his books. I've read quite a few of his writings, though, including some of his blogs. He's a very good writer. We share a mutual interest of history. He likes to explore it. I think he's a really good writer. I think he's someone that I could recommend. I'm glad he's one of the few initiates writing books.
Yeah.
Does he cater to a pagan audience more so than I wish to? Yes. But, I think people do what they think is right, and, I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, I like Jason.
So,
absolutely.
I recommend his books. I haven't read all of his books. He did reveal on his show, I'm very fascinated, he's going to be writing a book about Raymond Buckland.
Oh,
and
I love
think
that.
That's going to be very good. I'm not sure what his research source is, but I'm very excited about that. And I think it's a long time coming that someone in the Long Island line, and that's his credential, is high priest, Gardner and high priest of the Long Island line.
No, but I like Jason. Matt Oren, he's the one who wrote The Psychic Witch, I think. I've not read any of his books. I know he's really popular right now. The Psychic Witch is really popular right now. It's all over social media. I've not read it.
The only thing I could say about Matt Oren, because I don't know him, is that when his book came out, he had said something about credentials, right? We're talking about credentials. He's been in Laurie Cabot's classes, but he was never initiated as a Cabot. So he's not an initiated Cabot, and I believe he claimed he was on something. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I've been told.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's not actually a Cabot. His book's popular for whatever reason, so people must like it, but I haven't read it.
I just haven't read it. I have no judgment.
I don't like the title.
I have no judgment. Because I don't understand. Yeah, it's just... Also, like, Brian and I don't read. I think sometimes we don't always read a lot of these.
I don't read things that don't interest me.
And also, I don't think we read a lot of the... Like, I'm not going to read a book that's going to teach you the basics of certain aspects of witchcraft. I'm a high priest. And that's not... I'm not some elitist thing. I'm not trying to say I'm better than anyone.
I'm not going to read a book called Witchcraft Wands.
Yeah, it's like, I don't... You know what I mean? That's no judgment. It's just
It's not my thing.
It's not my thing, right? Like,
I've already got wands.
Like, I spent a lot of years doing that. So, like, I'm reading something else now.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left. And I'm sure Brian will want to do a little follow-up too. But I wanted to end on one thing, which is Thorne Mooney made a post recently that I loved, where she was talking about how a lot of people complain about modern witchcraft books and then don't ever give alternatives. Or talk about some of the really cool academic things.
And I do think new things are coming out and
they
should
are.
be explored.
Like Brian's book, and a lot of people have mentioned Brian. Brian,
Forms.
Brian wrote a book, Initiation into Witchcraft, that's available in both through Hex and Omen.
No, just kidding. I just want to say
on
that.
Amazon. But
I want it to be on iTunes.
It's from a traditional perspective. Thorne Mooney wrote one from a traditional perspective. Jason Mankey is writing books from traditional perspectives. If you're looking for something more academic, I can highly recommend Carlo Ginsberg and Emma Wilby.
We didn't get to those guys.
Yep.
Would you like
Emma
them?
Wilby is incredible.
I use both of them as resource material for Initiation.
Yep, I like Emma Wilby. I like Carlo Ginsberg. Carlo Ginsberg's not new, but neither is Emma Wilby. They've been around for a little bit. But I can also recommend Brian Levick's source book of Witchcraft source book if you're looking for source material. I can Peter's edited Witchcraft in Europe, which I can highly recommend.
And here's one I want to throw out that's real classic, but it's actually really good, is Reginald Scott's book, Witchcraft, whatever it's called. God, why can't I think of it now?
Reginald Scott? Why am I...
The Meaning of Witchcraft.
I was about to say, I was blanking on it too.
It's a really good book. It's not an easy read because it doesn't have any content or for searching for stuff. But if you want to go through and make notes, it is witch trial stuff, but it's really good. And he is actually the precursor to Margaret Murray, and it's just records of things.
And like I said, you also, if you're looking for a really accessible source book of witch trials, I highly recommend Levick's The Witchcraft Source Book. And he has two books. One of them is the source book, and then one of them is an academic discovery of witchcraft.
That's what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, I was blanking too.
I couldn't get it to come to my brain.
Yeah, discovery of witchcraft. But but if you're looking for more modern, easier to read, sometimes, like I said, Levick is really great. Witchcraft in Europe, edited by, I believe his last name is Peters, is fantastic. And that's just, I could list a ton of stuff for the occult or astrology, but I'm trying to keep with what Brian said, which was making it witchcraft,
we'll
right?
do Pythagoras some other day.
some other day, right? But if you, Proclus, by the way, is my favorite.
It'll have to be a day when I have lots of wine.
Wow, judgmental. But yeah, if you're looking strictly for witchcraft, of course, I got to throw out Christians, Witches Book of the Dead. I'm going to give a shout out to people we know, right? That's what we do. But all available through
which
your
I did have
retailer.
that on my list, but we didn't get to it.
We did, yeah, but I got to throw them out there. I got to give a shout out. But I think that there are lots of things coming out too in academic circles or whatever that are talking about the history of witchcraft, that are looking at
but
it.
You can't get
in
Christian's book right now because it's out of print. So you all need to harass him because he's coming out with a new edition if he ever gets around to it.
Harass him.
He's always picking new projects. He's a busy man.
But, we're nearing the end, and that's what I really wanted to say is there are great books coming out, and we've went over a few examples here, but, I liked that Thorne made that post to remind people that, it's easy to bash, but it's important to remember that we do have some pretty cool people writing. So, and Brian's written one. I'm very excited that mine's coming out soon. Mine will be on traditional astrology, but looking at cosmic planetary magic. But yeah, keep an eye out for those and find the authors that you really matter. And I think our next episode will be the season finale of this season of Covendom.
Yes, it's not going to be next week because next week is Hex Fest.
Yep.
So if you haven't got your tickets, they're still available. It is the 7th, 8th, and 9th. It'll be over the weekend. It's going to start out with an online ritual. It's going to have panels, and it's going to have all kinds of fabulous presenters. It is online. If you purchase it, you can watch every presentation at your leisure, and that's available perpetually for you. So that's really awesome. Whereas normally if you get to physically go, which is a really cool experience, you have to pick between 4 to 5 different workshops every time, and you miss a lot of content. So there is a positive side to it.
Yeah.
A lot of great speakers. So that's still happening. So we're going to be resuming the week after, which I believe is the 14th. And we've got some ideas in mind for the grand finale. And then we will take a break before we start season 3. And
yes, we will.
Decide whether we're just going to keep going this way or I don't know, get a parakeet or something.
Or like bring in cats. I don't know.
Something.
But
we feel like we need to shake it up.
We're going to shake it up for season 3. It has been a joy.
We should just do all the episodes skyclad.
We're not doing that.
It'd just be our knit.
We're not doing
that. We could still wear shorts. No one would know.
No one would know. So it's been a joy. We will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
Naked witches.
I'm ignoring this. Thank you for joining us. And please don't forget to subscribe to Hex Education.
Oh, yes. I keep forgetting to say that. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Hex Education, because we started this out and primarily YouTube was the way we would get views. So we got a lot of early views, but a lot of you watch it on Facebook. And so we don't get any clicks. But the thing is that people look for videos on YouTube. So as far as like archiving this and having it be searched later, YouTube is really the meaning. So even if you watch it on Facebook, please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and like. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So we will see you next time, guys. And thank you as always for being here on Covendom, right? We will see you next time. Bye.